Today it is almost the poorest country in the world. But once upon a time, on less land than the state of Rhode Island, the soil in Haiti produced as much wealth as all of America. Just before the French Revolution, most of the riches of France came from the north plain of this tiny island. Unfortunately, the French did not pay for this prosperity. The price was 3 to 6 million African men, women, and children. And then one day a man arose who you probably never heard of. He called himself the Black Messiah. When Columbus first saw Haiti in 1492, he called it the Paradise of God and named it Little Spain, or Hispaniola. More mountains than Switzerland, Hispaniola, now Haiti and the Dominican Republic, enjoyed abundant rainfall and lush forests. The Spanish did whatever was necessary to find gold and cruelly exploited the local Arawak Indians. In less than 50 years, almost all 1 million Arawaks were dead. Bishop Bartholomew Las Casas pleaded with the young King Charles V to stop the slaughter. The Indians were dying out too fast, so the Spanish looked to the Portuguese in Africa to supply them with slaves. And that was the beginning of the end for millions of Africans torn from their land and brought to Hispaniola, or Santo Domingo. Incredibly, 25% of all Africans taken as slaves were brought to this tiny island in the Caribbean. But for 200 years, the Spanish had only trouble in Hispaniola. Buccaneers and fierce pirates like Francis Lolané staged raids from Hispaniola and took the treasures of Peru and Mexico from Spanish ships as they passed nearby. So the Spanish gave the western third of Hispaniola to the French in 1697. The French named their part of the island Saint-Domingue, now known as Haiti. The slave trade rapidly increased as the French then brought millions of men, women, and children from Africa. Thousands arrived here daily at Cap Francais, now called Cap Haitien. Slaves worked in tobacco factories, such as this one at a typical sugar plantation near Cap Francais. In the sugar mills, the whip cracked continuously as slaves were awakened at 5 in the morning and often worked in fierce heat and humidity until 10 or 11 at night. The French were greatly outnumbered, thus they were especially cruel to the Africans to keep their spirits and wills broken. Slaves were burned to death or hung for the slightest infraction. All education, even learning to read the Bible, was strictly forbidden and punishable by the whip. Though it wasn't really true, slaves were convinced they were meant to be slaves because other Africans had sold them into slavery. Slaves were told they were fortunate to be working for the French. Young children did simple tasks and could not be taught to read or write. Parents were split up, not allowed to raise their own offspring. Generation after generation raised with no knowledge of books or the outside world. Then one day a 12-year-old boy arrived at the huge sugar plantation of Lenormand de Mazie. They called him Macandal. In Haiti, almost no one would speak to us of Macandal.
Because I know the Macandal inherited is a bad thing, it's a spirit.
He was thought to be a voodoo sorcerer. Leaders of Macandal secret societies that exist in Haiti today are considered the darkest of sorcerers and feared by all. We traveled to Souvenance to meet the man who could lead us to members of the secret society.
Every 7 years, there's a typical gathering in Souvenirs, which is one of the most prominent lakou in Haiti. It's a famous temple.
It was a ceremony attended by many of the leaders of secret societies and Go-Naives in the central part of Haiti. We met Uncle Fernan, the high priest of Souvenirs, and drank tafia, a strong drink from cane juice that is almost pure alcohol. We waited the whole night through ritual and ceremony before being given permission to travel to visit Macandal secret societies.
My name is Hans Esalen, and I am born Haitian, 100% pure Haitian, born in Port-au-Prince, but raised all over the country, mostly in the northern part of Haiti.
Hans spoke English, but was raised in Haiti and had been taught much oral history about the secret societies and Macandal.
Here in Haiti, we have the griot. It's a group of people which are here for the purpose of recording oral history. Every event that happens, they record it, and like in Africa, they repeat it for events, special events. And I think that the story of Macandal is so well kept in our society that only the griot can tell you exactly what Macandal is.
It's very difficult to speak you generally about Macandal. We have little information about his life.
Arabic too.
Oh, oui. Donc,
Yeah,
oui, musique était fort.
And he was good in music. He
Oui,
was
oui,
excellent
musique, sculpture.
in
C'est un grand
sculpture.
C'est un grand
In Macandal, who was a slave from the Limbe region. We haven't found out exactly what plantation he was associated with.
Some of the young are picked at an early age to be the successors of the adults. And fortunately, I was chosen to do a particular job, and I received a specific education into Haitian traditions.
Macandal organized some revolt in the plantations, in the plants, with the slaves against the colon, against white people. We are said also that Macandal was missing a hand in a sugar plantation in his activities in this plantation. And after that, Macandal was caught by the policemen of the colony, and he was delivered to the white people, and he was burned.
This is Bois Caiman, the secret location where slaves would sneak out at night to hear Macandal speak of freedom and revolution. Macandal had become highly valued on the plantation for his ability to heal people with his knowledge of plants. After Macandal escaped into the hills, he began gathering followers by the hundreds, insisting Saint-Domingue would become free of the French. No known slave in the previous 300 years of slavery had dreamed that such a thing was possible. The man in the white hat is a voodoo priest. He tells us he doesn't know who Macandal is.
Very early, I started studying on the heroes of the Haitian revolutions. And Macandal was a prominent figure to me. Long ago, the griot told me that Macandal, from the day he was put on a ship, never accepted slavery.
They approached Macandal on bended knee. For the first time, slaves thought about freedom, not just suicide or escaping into the hills. Macandal probably came from the Congo region of Africa. There is still a small village in the Congo that was probably the source of his name, as slaves were often named after their villages by slavers. When taken as a slave, Macandal was only 12 years old. Macanda, here shown, is near modern-day Kinshasa, just north of Angola. His father was a tribal chief in what was known as the Luango Kingdom. One of Macandal's most loyal captains was named Mayombe, and therefore may well have been from the same region as Macandal. Macandal could sculpt. Macandal could paint and play musical instruments. He had an amazing knowledge of plants and what they could be used for. But one of the most remarkable things about Macandal is that he could read and write Arabic fluently.
One of the reasons I was so interested in researching Macandal was because he was, as a young boy, highly educated, not the emotional primitive you see in films. He reads and writes Arabic. He's a doctor, sculptor, painter, musician, all at 12 years old. Macandal opens the door to a lost Africa, an Africa becoming literate and wealthy, maybe ahead of Europe, until the Portuguese come for slaves and burn every city to the ground.
Muslims, who sparked the magnificent Renaissance in Europe, had already done so in much of Africa.
He's done a lot of research there, so that's how he found out many things. And he also found out that many slaves were Muslims. That there's a part of the slaves that came in who were Muslims, and so Macandal was one of them.
Finding an obscure library in Port-au-Prince, we located books and documents from the 1700s. Before the slave trade, Africa was becoming rich from trade with China and India and the Muslims of North Africa. Beautiful cities were being built, universities. Islam was spreading as tribes learned to read the Quran and write in Arabic. While Europe was still mired in the poverty and plague of the Middle Ages, Africa may well have been enjoying a golden age of prosperity. In 1352, Ibn Battuta, a geographer from Algiers, wrote that the Negroes have a greater abhorrence of injustice than any other people. There is complete security in their country. Neither traveler nor inhabitant has anything to fear from robbers or men of violence. The Portuguese were angry with the Muslim Moors for their invasion of Spain and declared a Christian holy war on Africa. The Portuguese demanded gold and slaves. They burned African cities to the ground. To stay alive, tribes began attacking neighboring tribes just to obtain captives to offer to the Portuguese. Growth and prosperity stopped as Africans began fighting for their lives as the slave trade consumed the continent. The first known African tribe to begin attacking other tribes to sell to the Portuguese were from Dahomey. Africa became consumed in warfare as tribes became afraid of each other, fighting to avoid their own slavery by joining in the conquest for slaves. Blacks began hating other blacks from different tribes. This is an actual photograph taken in the 19th century. Africans lived every day knowing they were being hunted. Today, most people think of Africa as a land of simple tribes. With the loss of 24 to 48 million of the brightest and strongest men, women, and children, Africa was ravaged. Without gold and diamonds, there was little to rebuild with. From staging ports like this one, slavers would pick up new captives almost daily. Most damaging was the separation of husbands from wives and children from parents. The family structure was damaged over and over again as slavers relentlessly drove deeper into the heart of Africa to take them into slavery during the course of over 400 years.
As Africans were plucked, sold into slavery on the continent, there was little or no regard for family units. I mean, people were looking for strong, able bodies that would serve a specific need. The slavers had no interest in intact families and so forth. That, in and of itself, begins to send a message. And indeed, when people got to the New World, the sale, the disposition of people, family ties, not considered at all. Whatever importance, whatever meaning family had to me, that's challenged, because this is not my primary loyalty. The notion of a husband and wife, children, that kind of continuity, in my head, there's something else. There's this overarching relationship with power that I have to pay very close attention to. And that begins to gnaw at these strong family and institutional kinds of, psychologically. I mean, this doesn't happen in a year, 2 years, 3 years, but over time.
Macandal was no doubt familiar with Christianity. Perhaps this is why he referred to himself as the Black Messiah. He would tell people that no true God would be lord over people who could do such as this. So Macandal was chained to others and brought to be traded. They first arrived at a warehouse near the docks on the African coast. Then they were stripped naked and inspected. This slave's teeth are being checked. They were placed in hot and humid hulls of the ships on shelves not large enough to stretch out or stand up in. They were forced to lie in their own waste for the journey of 4 to 6 weeks. Slaves sometimes killed their own children to spare them the pain of slavery. Vast numbers committed suicide. slaves would stop eating. This slave is being force-fed. Slaves were made to fear suicide by disfigurement. After a suicide, overseers would cut off arms, ears, and so forth, because the Africans believed they could not go back to Africa as spirits if parts of their body were missing. This is where Macandal arrived after he was taken from his family at the age of 12, Cap Francais, now called Cap-Haïtien, a port on the north side of Haiti. It was here at this marketplace where he was sold. This is the place as it looks today, where slaves were inspected and bid on. The French didn't hesitate to kill or torture slaves who resisted. French accountants calculated that it was best to work a field slave to death within 4 to 7 years for maximum profit, before they slowed down or became sick and would have to be cared for.
And what's more devastating psychologically than that, to know that you cannot control your family, and that you are not the prime mover. The wife is vulnerable, you are vulnerable, children are vulnerable. I mean, this, and it with real cause, not any kind of fantasy. You see it happening around you, again, generationally. And it just seems to extract a heavy duty toll.
Even when the French adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man guaranteeing freedom for all, the planters ignored it. Haiti was just too profitable. After being inspected and bid on at the slave market, Macandal began the long trek to Limbe to work on the plantation of Lenormand de Mazie, the French planter who purchased him. Macandal will walk over 20 miles in chains to the Limbe River and valley. Macandal must walk far beyond the mountains seen in the distance. This is Limbe. Now he must walk to the Limbe River and follow it to the plantation. The bodyguards tread lightly and introduce themselves to almost everyone we pass, avoiding any challenges. We had been warned many times not to come to this area. People routinely disappear, and there is much ritual sacrifice. Dead animals are all around us. Our bodyguards are known as executioners. Even with them, we are challenged for being in this area. On this little bit of land in North Haiti, France collected 2/3 of all their wealth, all profit with virtually no cost for production, and sugar was in great demand all over the world for use in foods and in the production of rum. This is where 3 to 6 million slaves died through being tortured or worked to death. After 3 hours of trekking in the July heat, we see the plantation where Macandal was doomed to spend the rest of his brief life. All this while just a few weeks before he had existed in peace and security with a loving family, tribe, and friends in a lush valley with abundant food, water, and resources. Now, alone, without friends or family, and unable to speak the languages of the other slaves or the French, Macandal must have felt completely alone. Then we spot it, the far wall of the plantation.
Oh, it's still here.
The home of Lenormand de Mazie, his family, overseers, and about 200 slaves.
Right here. See this big wall? This is it.
One of the largest and most successful plantations in the North Plain. These walls were built in the early 1700s. When Macandal arrived here as a boy, he soon became known as a healer. He used his vast knowledge of plants to help others. Reportedly, slaves came from all over the colony to be cured. Even the French were amazed and sought his help. The French made sure slaves were kept illiterate and uneducated.
There were actual statutes on the books prohibiting education among the slaves, in large part because they felt that reading, writing, this expansion of the world of the slaves, the worldview, could do nothing but harm their interests, that is, a docile, servile workforce.
And when he got into the plantation in the north part of Haiti, around Lembe, the owner, the first time he saw him, said that, I definitely will get in trouble with that young guy. And Macandal, being a perfect leader, knew how to get himself into the slave society and even get himself to know what the white man thought, to understand how he could have a plantation going on, how he could mentally put the chains and have the Africans or the Creoles to work for nothing, but for waiting for death.
He was known for his wit and intelligence and raised the morale and confidence of slaves around him. Macandal, knowing well the value of education, became fluent. He taught himself French, perhaps teaching himself in secret. But then one day, at the age of about 18, Macandal fell in love with a beautiful young house slave. As was the case for many young house slaves, the girl was also pursued amorously by her owner. She had been forced to accept his advances, and no master tolerated the loss of a beautiful young slave to another. The master discovered that the girl and Macandal had fallen in love. Macandal apparently found out about the jealousy and did his work flawlessly to avoid any confrontation. But the master trumped up a charge to have Macandal whipped with 50 lashes, almost always a death sentence. White overseers were careful to use other blacks to carry out torture and punishment. Slaves usually were closed-mouthed, not knowing who was an informant. The master created hatred among the slaves towards each other to keep them divided and disorganized. Macandal refused to be whipped and instead broke free and raced into these hills.
The story says that when Macandal escaped the plantation, all the slaves felt that slavery was done with. And when he got into the mountains, when he became a Maroon, after being beaten with 50 slashes, which was a death sentence, he was left in the yard, and the masters thought that he was going to die anyway because nobody could survive that. But with all those physical activities, Macandal grew up to be a giant of 6 feet and something, weighing about 220 or 40 pounds. And wherever he would go, people would feel a presence, not only physical presence, but also a mental presence. And what is preserved with our oral history is that women, not only men, but women would just put themselves on the floor and saying, Macandal, you are the reincarnation or the incarnation of our Savior. You are the man who will, even if you can't lead us to liberty, but you will show us the way to get into liberty.
Being at a part of the plantation near Cap-Haïtien, he fled until he came to this pass in the mountains, searching for a hideout. Guides lead us to the spot. For the next 12 years, Macandal traveled the hills and ravines recruiting slaves for his revolution. He was the first escaped slave, or Maroon as they were called, who was known to claim that the slaves could actually defeat the French and have complete freedom. He declared himself a prophet, predicting that Saint-Domingue would gain freedom and independence. He told his followers that God had chosen him to free blacks. As this messenger of God, he called himself the Black Messiah.
And he started himself to resemble, to get together all the Maroons in the mountains of the northern part of Haiti. And slaves would be pouring in his camp, even if they didn't know him, just listening that Macandal was free and preparing the revolution. They would bring machetes, they would bring their tools, they would bring their knives, they would even bring their stone arms to Macandal and tell him that whenever he would start the revolution, there would be thousands to follow him.
Other escaped slaves were more or less content, but Macandal was a leader. It was not enough to be free himself. His goal was to unite the slaves and make the country theirs with freedom for all. He kept careful written records of those on each and every plantation who were loyal to him. He organized the Maroons into a military force with captains and lieutenants. 2 men, Teselo and Mayambi, were his closest confidants. Maroons had hidden colonies like this one with wives, children, and crops. Macandal was the first to unite all of the various tribes and secret societies into one cohesive force.
If I know something about a secret society, you know something about a secret society. It's not more a secret society. I can explain you that. I'm sorry. So I cannot and I don't know.
Because he so frequently escaped, people today believe Macandal was a part of the voodoo religion. However, there is no evidence that Macandal practiced voodoo. In fact, most of the leaders of the revolution who worked to free Saint-Domingue probably did not practice voodoo.
Yes, they credit voodoo for being responsible for the independence of Haiti. And we have information, and as I was telling you earlier, I have proof. Those are documents that are in my family, who has been in my family for a long time, where I can prove those are letters from Toussaint Louverture himself, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Henry Christophe, Alexandre Pichon, where they clearly expose their position about voodoo.
Digging deeper into voodoo, digging deeper into secret societies, I found out that each part of Haiti has a secret, a well-kept secret. Some of them knows how to make poisons. Some of them and others, very different from those who knows how to make poison, know how to cure from the poison.
Of many leaders of the revolution, Macandal was a priest of voodoo, means a hunga. You understand that? A priest of voodoo is someone who knows some secret about water, secret about trees, secret about the garden, secret about people, secret about sickness, and so secret also about some material things to take care of some sick people, of some people who had some problem. Macandal like a priest of voodoo. After that, the oral story teach us that Macandal had some possibilities to move from one place to another with quickly and mysteriously.
Voodoo is important because it's part of our past, of our culture. But the danger is that people are giving voodoo, I think, an importance that I don't think voodoo has. And the worst danger is that they're giving voodoo power that voodoo doesn't have. Because, as I said all the time, if voodoo was that powerful, why would Haiti be in that situation that it is right now?
Macandal declared war on the French, leading raids on plantations and poisonings throughout the colony. But not everyone would join the revolution. The free blacks and mulattoes had been treated well by certain planters. They had property and money. Without their support, Macandal's forces could not afford artillery. So instead of guns, Macandal chose to use poison. This man is a voodoo priest and claims he becomes possessed with the spirit of Macandal. His family is reportedly among the very few still in possession of the oral history. He says that Macandal abandoned Haiti because he could not get the people to unite as one. Both cameras stopped working inside his temple.
Yo bay chaque nèg 7 petits roches comme ça et puis bon Dieu 20 août vient arriver et puis 10 fait ici 10 fait ici 10 fait ici 10 fait ici 10 fait pendant esclave pendant ce temps noir mourir esclave mourir avec bon coup d'armes français au te gagné et puis Macandal pendant dans marronnage là l'aile ouais bataille là trop noir mourir. C'est laisse à venir présenter avec Agaou dans tête. On loi qui est Agaou.
After 12 years of raids and small attacks, he planned a major assault, distributing packets of poison to thousands throughout Saint-Domingue. His plan was to poison the French, and while they were in the throes of death, his forces would descend from the hills to finish the battle.
Dans la cour, consigne Marie Vaillant, nous les loyaux, yo innocents, papa, nous l'emmènons. Puis là, fait la lande. Depuis blanc, il vient gros bouton, il y a la fièvre, corps, tout le temps.
The French fought back by torturing slaves relentlessly for information. And at a dance called Calenda, similar perhaps to this one, held at the Dufresne plantation, a slave betrayed Macandal. Her name was Assam, and she brought him tafia, the strong drink made from cane juice. His senses dulled, Macandal was an easy target for his enemies. He was then taken by guards and tied up in the office of the plantation. The men went to get soldiers, but when they returned, the ropes were on the ground and Macandal was gone. The dogs were brought in and a full search of the area was launched. Macandal was captured. He was about 30 years old. After a mock trial, Macandal was taken here to the center of town to be burned at the stake. Slaves were gathered from throughout the colony to witness the punishment of their devoted leader. When Macandal was brought out in chains, he was brash and fearless, and he talked to the crowd of slaves. The day was January 20, 1758. He made a promise to all those present, saying that he would return as a mosquito to do more damage than ever before. The fire was lit around him, and the flames leapt higher and higher until he was completely engulfed. Then suddenly, with a loud cry, Macandal broke free and leaped out of the fire. The slaves claimed he jumped into the crowd and escaped. The French soldiers claimed they retrieved him and threw him back into the fire. Macandal was never seen again. 33 years later, a voodoo priest by the name of Boukman gathered heads of the secret societies at Bois Caiman, the same place where Macandal drew crowds of slaves. Boukman began the revolution with the same maroon colony Macandal had trained and organized before. This time, all blacks united.
In the night of August 14, 1791, Boukman got a great meeting with the principal leader of different groups of mounds in the mountain. The appointment was here. Women, ladies, men, gentlemen, here, together, to sing, to pray God in the same language. I can tell you it was for the first time black people from different African tribes were together to dance, to sing, and pray the same God in the same language for the first time. Before, no. After, no. Because you can see that until now, black American people, Africa, is not possible to be together. It's our mind problem. We cannot be together. We have not a problem. We have not to be together against other people, against white people or yellow people. We have to be together at first as black people, as people who have the same root, the same origin, the same story, and the same future. And so we have to work together with other people. We are on the same planet.
We cut Macandal, so nothing can happen after Macandal. And that's where they made a big mistake. Because after Macandal, as we know in his story, we had Boukman, We had Toussaint Louverture, we had then Dessalines, Christophe, Capua, Pétion, Gaba, Yayu, and all those prominent figures in Haitian history who kept bringing the fight for liberty. And Macandal being the screenplay, we can say, of an experiment, the slave society failed when they thought that by killing or destroying Macandal right here in the place of Cape Haitian and putting him on fire, they would destroy all mentality of revolt.
Napoleon sent all the troops he could spare, but the black troops were more disciplined and finally defeated the French. It was the first and only successful revolution by black slaves. Haiti started it, and Macandal first saw it. The most important hero of the revolution of 1791 was Toussaint Louverture. He was raised in the same area as Macandal. He was fortunate enough to be under a kind planter who allowed education. He was 16 years old when Macandal disappeared and no doubt was well aware of Macandal's revolution. Like other blacks treated well, Toussaint was not interested in revolution until it was inevitable 33 years later. Toussaint was wounded 17 times during his battles against Napoleon. Saint-Domingue was renamed Haiti, which was the original Indian name meaning land of mountains. Toussaint reorganized the plantations, and blacks went back to work for wages. Under his leadership, Haiti improved its revenue by 27% over the best production the French ever had using slavery. But Napoleon tricked Toussaint into coming to France. Once there, he had him jailed, where he died soon after. All of Cape Haitian was burned to the ground during the Revolution. The buildings you see here in the French style were all built after the Revolution because nothing was left standing. The British tried to take Haiti but could not. The reason was the mighty mosquito. The mosquito attacked like never before and passed yellow fever to the British, killing over 30,000 troops. The French tried to retake Haiti, but they could not, as many great generals arose to fight the French off. There are reminders everywhere of the battles against the French. Remains from plantations. What has happened to Haiti since the Revolution? After losing the war to Haiti, Napoleon convinced the European nations to stop trade with Haiti to give them a lesson. He warned other European nations that if Haiti was successful, black slaves everywhere would revolt and seek freedom. When trade stopped, Haiti was brought to severe poverty. Today, the legacy banning education for hundreds of years among slaves has left its imprint. Most Haitians still cannot read or write. Less than 2% have the equivalent of a high school education.
Education over time tends to be important only to the extent that education, as we think of it, literacy, can produce real results. You have common in movements of social change, oppressed population, the first generation gets access to education, and if indeed after getting educated there's a possibility of mobility, that will become reinforced. But if someone gets a population in Haiti gets educated, or it's late 18th century, and there's nothing to do with that but go back to the fields.
I would say that the economic situation has fostered the current family structure. Okay, and that if things were different, you'd have a different family structure. If there was more economic stability and security and people could make a reliable living, the current situation fragments families.
There were some studies done at that time in Chicago, and it should come as no surprise, but the black mothers had identical aspirations for their children, as did white middle-class mothers. They wanted their children to learn, and they wanted them to succeed. The difference was that they didn't know how to help the child. Most recently at the White House conference that Hillary Clinton held, research was released that showed the critical importance of that early intervention in a child's life. In the first months of life, talking to the child, stimulating their brain synapses, we could raise a child's IQ by 20 points with a one-year intervention in the classroom with these young children. And the long-term studies, 15 and 20 years later, show that the Head Start children are significantly different than their peers from the same neighborhood. They have continued their education. They've graduated from high school. Many of them have gone on to college. They are better off economically. They have a better family life, a more stable family life, and have been more successful in life, at least the way we define it, than children who did not have that Head Start experience.
If you pitch a tent anywhere in the countryside, everyone comes to learn. Macandal was taken from a tradition of education and accomplishment in Africa to be a slave. He was supposed to be worked to death in 4 to 7 years in a land now called Haiti. He gained his freedom, but would not accept it. Instead, he insisted everyone be free. Most people do not know that without the Haitian Revolution, Napoleon probably would have never given up the middle part of America, sold as a Louisiana Purchase. What Macandal started actually changed the world, yet his story was virtually lost.
Of the Macandal history, I can say that I feel this guy in my veins whenever I see frustration, whenever I see poverty, whenever I see oppression.
I used to work with young children, started a number of programs in early childhood and child development, but I currently work with graduate students. And what I see in terms of long-term effects is that these graduate students have had lowered expectations of them from the time they first entered school. Nobody thought they could do it. Nobody gave them the attaboys. So when I say to a black graduate student, you can be a scholar and a researcher, they look at me with surprise. No one had ever said that they could learn. And if given the proper stimulation and the proper kind of educational environment, they bloom and, of course, are extremely successful.
Macandal brought in all those little revolutions at an early stage and was the leader, the main figure of the Haitian independence.
Linda. Parlez.
Mrele la tortue Angeline.
Mr. Elizabeth.
Joseph. Hey, Joseph.
Who that boy? Hey, yo.
Moi, les Jacques.
Moi-même, c'est Claudette Jean.
Pierre. Même c'est J'espère François.
Pierre.
Moi, les Jean-Élie Saint-Ville.
Nom, c'est Patrick. Marguerite Joseph.
Janine Delva.
Marcilien. Claude.
My name is Fred Lee.
Okay, I'm Gary.
My name is Romeo.
Andre.
John Eddie. Je m'en passé pour il y a pas de genre quand on a frappé. Je vais commencer à notre nègre qui va essayer.
Jean-Baptiste Pierre.
Louis.
Oh man.
Rosmelia Pierre.
Sylvia Mibel.
Nadesh. Martin. Luce was.
Cindy?
Oui.
Comment elle est?
Roselain.
Rosalind?
Oui.
Comment elle est?
Bouchon.
Bouchon?
Oui. Nadège.
Nadège?
Oui. Vous?
Kali.
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
René Mandy Williamson. René Nadège.